this later. And then, Kayt, every time I say your name, as I'm looking at how it's spelled, I'm always convinced that I'm saying it wrong, but it is Kayt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, I will say the wrong thing because we'll be in front of people. I know I will. So just make
you got it right.
Don't want to call you by the wrong thing. We got Kayt Warren with us today, and I'll let her introduce herself to you and tell you about her roles in the community. We're going to be talking again about self-care. We were having a conversation before this started about our conversation last week kind of being about self-care, but we both agree, first of all, you can never talk about it too much. And I think it's still going to be a little bit different. So I'm excited to hear where we go with this today. So Kayt, I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us what you want to know.
Okay. Hey, hi, everyone. First off, thank you for having me. This is an area of interest for me. I love to talk about how trauma informs us and how we inform those we serve, and self-care, and how to stay well and continue to be effective in the work that we do, because it's not easy. It is really not easy. So I am a licensed clinical addiction specialist. I also have my master's of social work. So currently I teach part-time in the social work department, but the bulk of my practice has been with medication-assisted treatment for individuals struggling with opioid use disorders, which is very, very difficult work. And I did that for over 12 years. And yeah, so I also serve on the board with OASIS. I work with WCCI. I also do some work with the Western Youth Network. And I also serve on a task force with OASIS. It's a sexual violence prevention task force. So that's the work I do in our community. And that's who I am. And I do want to apologize. I have 2 dogs that through this pandemic have lost all boundaries. And so they just think that I'm theirs all the time. So if they poke, if they bark, we'll just keep on going, just ignore them.
I saw the door swinging open behind you, and I thought, I hope that's a dog or a child.
And not a ghost.
Yes, yeah.
No,
so
no, that's they're wrestling back here.
Okay, we actually love pets and babies on our Zoom calls. We're happy for either one of those things, so no worries on our behalf.
Well, there will be no more babies in my world, but there will always be lots of pets.
Okay, I can relate to that statement. Well, thank you for being with us today. You and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and I'm excited about the things that we're going to get to talk about. So let's start by talking about trauma and how you see people in trauma. And one thing that I have been really excited about lately, we've used several different definitions of trauma. One I read a few weeks ago that I love and continue to say every chance I get is, it's an event that exceeds our ability to cope.
Yeah.
From person to person, that changes. And it could be what's traumatic for you is not for me, vice versa. What's traumatic for me today, if I'm already sick and tired and bills are due, may not be traumatic for me next Wednesday at this time. So I really like that definition because it kind of broadens our understanding of what trauma can be for each one of us individually. So if you want to add something about that, or just tell us the kind of people that you've worked with and how trauma has affected them.
Well, so the thing that I like to, as my role as an educator, I really acknowledge that through my formal education, I was not given substantial information regarding trauma. I don't even know that the word was used through my MSW. And I also got a graduate certificate in drug and addiction studies, and they go hand in hand. And so one of the things that really early on I realized is that I was ill prepared when it came to the concept of trauma, and also understanding that a lot of people that get into the helping professions are bringing our own trauma histories to the table as well. And we do, there's a reason that this work is drawn to, that we are drawn to the work and the work is drawn to us. And so when you're talking about the definition of trauma, remember when I started to understand this is big and I really have to be able to work within this and deal with my own stuff, the SAMHSA definition was the one, and it was like 300 words long. And I thought, well, this is a lot of $10 words to describe. And what I like to think of trauma is it's a normal response to an abnormal event. And so the effect that it has on every individual is good. It is so individualized. And so the effect is the piece that I like to focus on. And, through my work with it's opioid use disorder, people struggling with opioid use disorder, I did this for 12 years. I would say 100% of the people that sat in front of me had experienced trauma, and about 20 of them understood that they had experienced trauma. And so the trauma that they understood was trauma was what we commonly think of as trauma, which is like extreme physical abuse, extreme sexual abuse, just extreme cases. Whereas most of them also had other forms of trauma that could be just as harmful or just as extreme, but they didn't necessarily understand that that's what was going on. And so a lot of my work, you gotta go, really was rooted in helping people understand how the trauma had impacted them without talking down to them, without saying like, you experienced trauma and this is why this is happening. And so I had to get very creative, even if it was just with my language, and helping individuals understand that the behaviors that they were exhibiting now were in fact attributed to a trauma that they had experienced at some point in their life. And so my role as an educator and a counselor, I really focused on becoming trauma informed and attending a lot of trainings and doing my own research and understanding that anybody in any helping profession needs to have at least a foundational understanding of how trauma impacts people. And I've been having conversations in the community. I also think, like, I was talking to the girl that cuts my hair, and she tells me the things that people tell her. And I was like, wow, we have to get you some sort of education, because you're hearing what people, I mean, and that's got to be hard for you, but you also don't know how to refer people out or what to tell people. And so I just think it is something that as a society, we need to be talking about more. And we've all just experienced some sort of collective trauma living through a global pandemic. And I realized how much that had impacted me when I, was having a discussion about something, and I had a physical reaction to something somebody had said to me. And I was like, I have been in this for almost 2 years and didn't even know that I was experiencing trauma. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm not knowing and I'm trauma informed, how do we expect others, especially our youth and our adolescents? And so it's very important to me to just understand the basics of trauma. And then for me, I have to go in deeper into what that looks like. So that's where trauma has come to my work.
I want to go back to what you said about hairdressers, because we have someone who was a BSW student who's been a hairdresser for years, who has a passion for giving hairdressers, bartenders, those kinds of jobs that tend to hear more disclosures from people, the tools that they need to be able to listen, be a positive support. And so she had a real passion for that work. She had to step away from her degree work to work during the pandemic. But what it reminds me of is we had an offshoot of WCCI's, the Community Mental Health Project. And we made a website of all the resources in the community, and then made a flyer with a QR code. So wherever you are, you can scan it. You don't have to go to an agency to get a list. It's right there. And that reminded me, I wonder how many of those got up in bars, hairdressing places, those kinds of things. So I made a note to myself to make sure we go back and hit those again, because I do think that those are the kind of people that hear all these stories and have unless it's just natural and inherent, none of the skills that would be helpful, not only for the people they're listening, hearing it from, but themselves as well.
And I just saw Amber put in the quote with the in the chat. That is something we were discussing in the prevention group pre-pandemic. And I think it'd be wonderful to revisit that. And with the work that I'm doing with Oasis, they do the bar trainings. And I have also suggested that we start going into some of the salons and places. And so just to give those, just to be able to say, okay, what this person is telling me is traumatic and they deserve resources. But, or, even with Oasis, it could be to the point of they need to have an intervention. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
And another thing I wanted to go back to, you said you think 100% of the people you work with have trauma, and maybe 25% or 20% of them understand what that is and what that means for them. And I think in most of our, whether it's hospitality house, juvenile justice, foster care, you're talking about 95% and above people experience trauma. Either that's what brought you to my door, or that you have a long-standing history of that. And I also agree that, I think this is the last thing I want to go back to, I didn't hear about it when I was getting definitely not my BSW. I finished in 93, but not even my MSW. I finished in 2017, and teachers don't get it in the educational curriculum. Business people don't get it, and it's in your customers and in your employees. Criminal justice doesn't get it, and it's in all of the higher rates of incarceration and criminal enforcement involvement. So when I let myself think about it, that's a daunting task, but definitely I think it's worth mentioning that most of us were trained. It's just come along really, especially to this area in the past 5 years or so.
Right, and largely in part because of you. I think that you have a strong hand in that, and it's greatly appreciated. And when I say 100%, that doesn't mean that it's like directed at them. Like I tend to look at things like poverty as a form of trauma, racism as a form of trauma, things that we don't necessarily, you can't pinpoint an event, but it's perpetual. And so that people internalize this, and it really does change the way the coping skills, the defense mechanisms, the way people interact with the world. And I think it's imperative that we are having these conversations across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. So moving to our next question of our topic, how do you help build resilience in other people? And I think this is probably true for you. This is just a wild speculation, not just for your clients, but you strike me as someone who also brings us into your personal life of, how can we all take better care of ourselves? And in fact, you wanted your thing to be called, how do we take, in the face of working with trauma, how do we take better care of ourselves and each other? So what are some things that you do to help people build their own resilience that have experienced trauma?
Well, you're very right. I'm almost to the point of annoying with some of the people in my life, those that I love. I'm like, you're not well, let's get well. And the way I start this truly is living that. I have to understand who I am, like on a really, really intense level. Like daily, I have to check in with myself. Are you well? Are you okay? Can you do this work today? And then with the people that I love in my life, sometimes they'll call and need stuff from me, and I'm like, I can't be this person for you right now. So I live in this form of trauma informed from myself by being very self-aware, having very firm boundaries, and understanding what self-care looks like. That's another thing. When I was in graduate school, they talked about it all the time. Self-care, self-care, self-care. But it seemed like this concept to me that one day I'll be able to practice self-care, and I'll, go to restaurants with my friends or go get a massage or go get my nails done. When in actuality, self-care is very much about working to be happy, working to be the best version of yourself. And that looks different for everybody. So that's why it is such a concept, existential sometimes. And so nobody told me how to do it. I had to figure that out very much on my own. How do you practice self-care? Well, in order for me to practice self-care, I had to go back and deal with all of my BS that I had internalized throughout a lifetime of being a human, and being a human is really hard sometimes. And so part of my story, when I was doing work with the McLeod Center early on, I think I was about a year into practice, I left work. And I eat well, I exercise, I do all these things. So I went and got a Coke and a bag of Cheetos and sat in my car and ate the entire bag of Cheetos and wept. And I was like, this isn't healthy. This isn't a good coping skill. And I talked to a friend of mine who was a therapist, and I thought, therapists aren't supposed to have therapists. That's that's not right. If I'm not well, then how can I therapize somebody else? And he was like, oh no, you're way off. Therapists need therapists probably just as much, if not more, than others. And so I swiftly got myself a therapist, and I dealt with the assistance of this therapist, multiple things. And I had realized that if I keep everybody around me well, and then I'm well. And that was a very strong realization for me to understand that I was not doing work for altruistic reasons. I was doing it because I was it was my ego. If I could be the best therapist, then obviously I was a good person. And then I had to do a lot of work in that realm. And it was very humbling. There was a lot of humility. I had to have a lot of grace for myself, a lot of permission to not be okay. And then and not even on the other side, because I'm still doing this work. But when I got to the place of realization that it's okay to not be okay, but it's just what you do with that information that, is the foundation of if you are well. And so I live by example. I try to, because if I'm not practicing these things, then it's not organic for me to be telling somebody else that they need to be doing this or guiding them to get to that place of empowerment. So I very much do the work myself, and it's hard work. It's very hard, and it's daily. And then sometimes it is too much to take, and I take steps back and I acknowledge. But if I can guide somebody to build their own resilience by doing it myself, then I think that's important for me. And so one of the hardest questions that I've noticed throughout my practice, when I ask somebody, whether it be through an assessment or treatment plans, I'm like, let's start to talk about your strengths. Let's identify your strengths. Stumped. It's like you asked them some sort of algebra question. It's like, I can't get there. And it's like, so we've been taught as a society not to be proud of our strengths. Now, we can all identify our limitations and weaknesses, areas of improvement, as I like to call them. But when you ask somebody what their strengths are, they're like, I'm friendly. I'm like, no, you're friendly. And so I do think part of my job as a mental health clinician is helping people to improve their own self-esteem. I'm not doing that for them, but I'm working on helping them improve their sense of self and understanding that the way that they behave is partially because of things that have happened to them. So it's that shift in what's wrong with you versus what happened to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things when you were talking about helping everybody around you be well so I can be well, it reminded me of in therapy, I feel the need to be the best patient possible.
I got to win.
Yes. And I've only just got therapy for the 4th time since I was 20. And I was thinking the other day about why I didn't tell my therapist something. And I was like, because that would have made me not the best patient possible. Like, I'm not going to tell my therapist something because I don't want her to think of me as somebody who makes bad decisions or doesn't know how to take care of herself. That was a mixture. I was horrified and just like so funny that I had taken that perfectionistic, overachieving, caretaking thing all the way into therapy to where I can't even do my own work because everybody's got to think, I'm the best there is at everything. So that was kind of an eye-opening thing for me recently.
Yeah, we're the best at everything until you have to identify your strengths. And then but also with something that I've learned about myself is if I admit to my therapist, to my partner, to my child that I'm not okay or I'm not human, all of these things, then that feels like because I feel like I should be smarter than everybody, emotionally more intelligent. And I know that's not true, but sometimes if I say these things out loud, then it's acknowledging that. And that's my ego. And I say this word so often because a lot of us function out of our ego. And it's like, we're afraid to be vulnerable because it's going to make us look less than. We're afraid to put ourselves out there because it's going to make us look less than. And so I try to be very organic and very honest with, with my students, with my family, with my clients, and say, I'm flawed. but I'm working on my issues, as we all should be. And so I think normalizing the behaviors that trauma have impacted it's incredibly important.
Yeah. It reminds me of years ago, like I was the most anxious person that I have ever known. And I never made a mistake, ever, never made one. It wasn't even that I made them and didn't admit it. I did not make mistakes. And I can't remember if I had a child at the time because those will humble you in a quick hurry. But somebody I worked with, I made a tiny mistake thing. And she was like, oh my God, I've worked with you 6 years. I've never seen you make a mistake. Like, that's amazing. I was horrified. I was like, this is a downhill slide straight to hell. Like, I've made my, it's over now. And it is true that the more relaxed and less anxious you become, but the more mistakes that you make, because you're just living life and like, you're not perfect all the time. But that was really hard for me to accept that I'm not going to be perfect all the time. Like, I didn't even know what to do with that.
So that you just sparked a memory for me. I also am not good with making mistakes. Now I'm 100% like, I just messed up. I'm so sorry. But it was because the perfectionist in me. I mean, I was, straight A student, all of these things. Well, I have a friend that makes fun of me because I won't let my gas gauge get below like a quarter of a tank. Well, 2 weeks ago, I ran out of gas. And I've never run out of gas. And I called her to tell her, and I figured she'd make fun of me. And she said, sometimes our biggest fears lived are the way we grow. And I thought I was not expecting her to be poignant or deep, but then it made me realize, I was like, I ran out of gas and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding that we as humans are flawed and normalizing the flaws, normalizing the fact that people make mistakes, and we should not exist in a vacuum. We should let people help us. And those of us in the helping profession are very against that. And I look at it from a place of, when we help others, we are giving the best of ourselves so that they can improve their situation, whatever that looks like. But we're not allowing people to give us the best version of themselves and help us. And so in a way, it's somewhat selfish, like not accepting help, but when somebody wants to help.
Yeah, I didn't let people touch me for years and years, nor did I let them help me. That help. So I've got the touching thing down now, but the helping I'm still working on. And then I don't know. I say I get voices, and I'm always expecting people to come with a straight jacket. But a voice said to me one summer, "You're not letting people touch you to hug you. First of all, you're worried that somebody's going to harm you, but you're grown. You're not 4 anymore, so you can handle that. And you not letting them hug you when they need to comfort you, and that's all they know to do, causes them pain. So it's okay. You can take care of yourself. Let people hug you, because that's how they're trying to comfort you."
Mm-hmm.
And so, but for people who've known me my whole life, that's only been about 9 years ago. So people are still like, "Can I touch you?" And I'm like, that's old. I got over that 9 years ago. But same thing now with the helping. It just has in the past month occurred to me that what you said, the not letting people help you, when that's all that they know to do or can do for you, it causes them pain.
Mm-hmm.
And often I can only accept things like that for myself by putting it in the context of what it does for other people, because I just am not there yet with myself. But I can relate to, they're trying to help you. It causes them either pain or discomfort that you won't let them. So just let them. You'll get used to it eventually. And then
Right.
they'll feel like they're helping.
I love what you said. Like, you've proven you can take care of yourself. Like, clearly you're very self-sufficient and independent. So let's let other people in.
Mm-hmm.
And that voice you're hearing is your conscience and your ego. And they're like, I don't know who to listen to, but it's you wanting to be a better version of you. I mean, bottom line, that's why we're all here. That's those of us that participate in things like this. It's because we want to better serve the marginalized populations. We want to be of assistance. But in order to do that, we need to let people serve us and be of assistance to us as well, with boundaries.
Well, that's tough. There's somebody on this call that I think it was last week I called her, and I was like, so I've got something really big happening in my life. I'm just telling people one at a time. Honestly, I just realized this because I couldn't take like 20 people that I know all loving me at the same time. I wouldn't know what to do with that. So I'm just telling people in pockets. And I told her, and ever since then, she's texted me every day. What do you need? How can I help? I love you. She texted me this morning. I was like, I'm sorry that, I might cry.
That's okay.
She was like, I'm sorry that you did that alone for a little while. Because I said, yeah, it was like 5 weeks ago, but I'm starting to tell people. She's like, I'm sorry you did that alone for a little while. And it was this morning she said that. And I thought, it's so hard for me. I think I'm getting better at accepting the help. It's still hard to be like putting it out there that I might even need it. And so not even comfortable yet with that of I'm not in a good place and I need people to help me. So working on that, but I love that at this point in my life, at least now I know who I can say that to. Like there was a time when I would just say it to everybody willy-nilly and nobody would help. And so you'd be like, see, that's why you don't tell people that because nobody helps you. And I'm really happy that at this point in my life, I at least now know like who I can say that to. And then they're, text you every day and would come get you and drive you somewhere if you needed to. But that's new for me.
And first off, I appreciate your honesty. That is I mean, you're really revealing a lot of yourself in this conversation. And that what you said with you would just put it out there. It's like, let's throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. That's a
Yeah.
defense mechanism. That
Yeah.
is 100% learned behavior, because you're like, I have never, once again, I don't need you because I know you're not going to step up.
Mhm.
And also, I want to talk about friendships, because I think in my self-care, my friends play an incredibly, incredibly important role, because they're the ones that I have selected. Now, my husband, I also selected. My parent, I love them, my family, but when you're young, the friendships are the first relationships of your choice, of your choosing. And so it's, you're putting yourself out there to see like, okay, this is, this person and I are going to, talk and share things. And friends, when you're in your teenage years and 20s, they're designed by your school or wherever it is that you're attending. But as we get into more of the adulthood, the friends that are there for our choosing should definitely serve us in some capacity, as we should serve them. And so you being willing to allow your friend to say, I'm here if you need me. You may never, but giving that person space to say, I got you. I will hold you through this time.
Yeah. Still, what scares me, terrifies me to hear it coming out of your mouth too. So I just got to sit with it.
Well, through
Go
our
ahead.
lives, we've all created these trauma bonds. And so those of us that don't want to be in that place anymore are trying to create healthy relationships. And that's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Well, it's so many, tied to so many things, so many trauma experiences. So we talked about knowing your own boundaries, taking care of doing your own work, doing what you need to do for you, having friends that you can trust. Number one factor to offset trauma is relationship with a positive, consistent, caring adult. Other things, one thing that's come up before, if you're working with or know someone who does nothing to take care of their own wellness, do you have a good place? Is there a place you suggest people start? Is there an easy first step? Like, what's a good place to start when that's really a pretty big area of needing attention?
So that's difficult. So, and I've said this throughout, I have such grace and compassion and empathy for my clients and the populations I serve, but my relationships with colleagues are always the more trying. And so but my licensure, my code of ethics says that I'm supposed to say something if I see people that are acting unethically. And I do think if we're not caring for ourselves, this could fringe on unethical behavior. Luckily, when I have pointed this out in the past, it was well received. It was sort of like the person already knew and was kind of waiting for somebody to say something. And I do think, and for those of us in the mental health field that carry these licensures, we understand the benefits of clinical supervision. And so the clinical supervisor, and I do some clinical supervision for others, it's sort of the responsibility of that person to continue this work and to say these things. I've encouraged people to reach out to their clinical supervisor, or I've mentioned, you don't seem to be the best version of yourself right now. I encourage everybody in the world to get a therapist. I wish we could, on a more systemic level, advocate for that to be a more achievable goal. So, that's something I advocate for. I don't know if it'll ever come to play, as the number one provider of mental health services in our country is our prison system. So sometimes it feels like you're banging your head against the wall, but I do think it's important, if you see something, to say something. And just starting with the basics of, are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you caring for yourself? Do you have a supportive somebody that you can lean on? If not, I can be that person for you to an extent with my boundaries. But my recommendations usually begin with therapy.
You've mentioned boundaries several times, so let's just talk about that a little bit. I think it's hard as humans to set boundaries. I think through all these conversations we've been having, what's clear to me is that our society and our culture really rewards and recognizes overproduction, overachievement, stretching yourself too thin, working too much. And I think then even exponentially increase that for service providers, therapists, those kinds of people who, to me, I really struggle with that, not taking on the savior complex of like, this is my responsibility, fix the whole entire world. So can you talk a little bit about what your boundaries are, or how you recognize when one needs to be put in place, what you do if they're starting to, you notice, how do you notice? Because this is one thing I've thought about a lot. We're going to come to this question next. It's one thing to list all the things you do to take care of yourself, but how do you know when it's time to do those things? You said, I'm not the best version of myself, I'm not well. So just, can you talk some more about boundaries?
Yeah, and boundaries also were just a theoretical concept to me. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that looked like. Through work with a really fantastic therapist, it was pointed out to me that I don't have clear boundaries, but then I get frustrated with those around me that overstep my boundaries. And that was my fault. That was definitely something that I was doing wrong, because again, as a helper, I feel that I'm required to be this helper with everybody in my life. And then my cup was empty. There was nothing. And so I definitely wasn't being the best version of myself as a therapist. And I taught, here's this word again, ego. When I was working, and I was working way too much, and I thought, well, they're not going to be okay if I'm not there. And I thought, well, that's me. That's my ego. That has nothing to do with the client. It is my job technically to provide them skills so that they eventually will be okay without me there. This has been very difficult being a mother as well. And so I check in a lot, and I have to acknowledge, like, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for the other person? And so with my boundaries, I had a friend one time say to me, use your no muscle. And I was like, you're right. I don't have to go to everything that I'm invited to. I don't have to be at every conference. I can not go into work one day, not because I'm physically ill, but because my mental wellness isn't okay. That these things are okay. And so granting myself permission was where I started with my boundary work. And a lot of it's my gut. It really just is. I really do pay attention when my body is talking to me, my physical reactions, my gut reaction. I pay attention to that. And then, at first I felt like boundaries were selfish, that boundaries were going to hurt other people's feelings, that the boundary was going to tell somebody that I didn't care about them. And my most recent therapist says to me, boundaries are the way that I can love you and love me too. And that just right there. So, but at first when I was like, no, like no to everything. And then I'm like, okay, let's soften those edges and do things you want to do, and do things that do serve your growth. But it's okay to, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, sometimes I have friends that call for me to be therapist, Kate. And if I don't have then I get frustrated with them. And I'm like, I have to be honest with you right now. I'm not in a place to do this. You give me 24 hours, we will revisit this. And that's appreciated. I never thought that would be well received. I thought it was me being kind of, crabby, but it's actually like, thank you.
I think because we never see it modeled. Like I know for me, when I see somebody setting a boundary, I'm like, oh my gosh, there it is in real life. There is somebody setting a boundary right there. I get to see it in action. It's so exciting. When somebody goes to eat outside where there's no phones or people lined up at their door, I'm like, oh my God, look at that. That can exist in the world. That's possible. So whenever I see anybody setting a boundary these days, I'm like, oh, wow, that's fantastic. Let me really take note of what that looks, because look, there's nobody in the floor dying of lack of air. Nobody's on fire. Like, here's the boundary happening, and we're all still existing in peaceful harmony. So it's so exciting to me to actually see somebody do it, because it's a model for me about that it can work.
And might I encourage you, when you do see that behavior, to really commend somebody and say, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Because they may not even know that they're doing it, but like, you're taking care of you. And, I just think it's so important. That old saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. That doesn't mean give the mother everything she wants. It means allow space for the individual to become happy, to experience life in a positive manner.
Yeah, makes sense. The other thing I love about boundaries is that when you're talking about ethics, it's really critical we set them for
Mhm.
people who grew up without them,
Mhm.
because they don't have a clue what it looks like or that it's okay to do. And I read somewhere setting a boundary is like the most loving thing you can do for someone who doesn't have them, because they don't even know that they exist.
Right.
And so showing them that it's okay to do it, how to do it in a calm, neutral way, so that you can model for them that it's possible for them. That has stuck with me too.
It's very true.
So boundaries, and then you said something about um, that it's even okay to set them, because I think a lot of times when we're talking about self-care, whether it's getting sleep or setting boundaries, I think especially for people with a trauma history, there's even the step prior to that of like, when is it time to set a boundary? When do I need to go to sleep? What is appropriate sleep for me? We're so checked out from our you said my body tells me,
Mhm.
but you can be so checked out from that you don't even know what getting enough sleep for you actually is. Like, it's so elementary and simple, and where you start with that.
And this is where we come in as the helping professionals to help people identify when they're not 100%, when they're not well, and to say it's okay. Now, what can we do to help you get there? Because we're not doing the work for people. For in my perception, I'm challenging them to make shifts so they can empower themselves to be the version of them that they want to be. I don't get to decide what's good enough for somebody else.
Mm,
And removing that from my work was liberating, because it felt so daunting and so much pressure. Like, I'm responsible for all of these things. No, I'm not. I'm
yeah.
responsible for me.
Last year at the conference, they were talking about, a lot of people say my door is always open,
Mhm.
but often they don't even know how to get to the door, or which door is yours, or what a door even looks like for that matter. And that sometimes we have several steps to back up to help people even get to that point of, and what we were saying about asking for help, accepting help, knowing when you need help. It may be that people need some support even prior to the asking for help. Like, when do you ask for help? How do you ask for help?
And I think the problem is people ask for help when they can no longer live the way that they're living.
Mm,
Sorry.
no worries.
And so when people, there's this staying in the addictions field, it's sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's when people actually reach out for help, or when like they, hit rock bottom. So then, because we don't normalize therapy and we don't make it accessible. And so people are like, I have to ask for help because my mental health is so not okay right now. And so I look at it, it's sort of like changing the oil in your car. If you wait until the engine blows, you got to kind of start from the beginning. But if you keep up with it, like that regular maintenance, it's easy. It's not daunting. It's easy to, do small things every day as opposed to big things all at once.
Mm-hmm.
And we really do need to make a shift. So when we say mental health, immediately we think mental illness. We say physical health, we think somebody's in shape. So why are they so separate? These do not exist in a vacuum. You can't have good mental health without good physical health. You can have good mental health and struggle sometimes. You can have good physical health and struggle with your mental health sometimes, but they're very hand in hand. And so even changing that shift in language, when you ask somebody about their mental wellness and we destigmatize mental illness, that's going to be a shift societally that we can make to inform those who struggle with mental health, those who struggle with physical health. Now, you get a diagnosis of cancer and somebody's going to take you out to lunch or make you a pound cake. You get a diagnosis of bipolar, they're going to avoid you.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of conversations lately with the Community Mental Health Project about, and WCCI, about language and stigma, and really trying to address how do we shatter those. And I do think a lot of it is language, and then the best day will be when we say wellness and we assume it means both things.
Right.
You don't have to delineate between the two.
Well, and we acknowledge that people are working on both. Because I don't know anybody that's in peak physical health that doesn't work on it.
True. Oh gosh, that is so true.
But it's the same thing with mental health. I don't know anybody that's got great mental health that doesn't work on it.
Yeah, good point. I'll have to write that down.
I mean, it's work.
Yes.
We do all this work with the community and we enjoy it and it's part of who we are. And we can identify with this and we can say, oh, I work with Oasis and I work with WCCI and I work with adolescents. But then when you say, I'm going to work on myself, it's like, oh, that's selfish. I'm a giver, not a taker.
Yeah, good point.
Which is why the burnout rate in this profession is through the roof.
You and I talked about this a little bit with our students because I teach a little bit too. And I talk a lot to students about savior complexes. And if you think you're the end all be all, you'll last maybe 3 years. And it's much easier to never get burned out than it is to come back from that. It's very difficult to come back from burnout.
I love that. That just gave me chills.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So try never to go there because it's really hard to come back.
But with what we do, we're just more and more and more and more and more is placed on us. And so if we're not working on boundaries, if we're not addressing our ailments, whether they be physical or mental, we're going to burn out or we're going to be incredibly unethical practitioners.
Yeah, I like that you said, if you see a colleague, I'll ask them about that, and ethical, because I do think sometimes when it's hard for us, and I said this about myself, when it's hard for us to conceptualize it for ourselves, we may have to do it in terms of how do I impact other people. And so what maybe we can deal with first, how it impacts our clients before we're able to do it a one-on-one with ourselves. But having those conversations when somebody, and we really worked on that in school lately. I was at a DSS meeting one time. They were talking about how they debriefed a meth lab operation. How when it was over law enforcement, DSS, everybody got together and talked about how it went. What would they want to do different next time? And I had, at that point, had been in the school system probably 15 years. And I thought, in all the things I've seen in the school system, I've never seen anything like that. We never get together after it was over and talk about how'd that go and what do we need next time. So we've all started trying to do that more. And this was a traumatic event. And what does everybody need to be able to move, to be able to go home and to be able to come back tomorrow and feel like we're well? And that was really unheard of here. And so trying to do that with our colleagues of Mary McKinney calls it relational care rather than self-care, caring for one another in our relationships.
I like that, relational care. Write that down.
I know, I've taken pages of notes. If anybody has a question or a comment for Kayt while we're talking, you're welcome to put that in the chat. Let's see, so many things. One thing that we talked about in our first conversation we haven't talked much about today is media exposure. You had mentioned that that's an area that you try to keep some awareness about. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and just throughout this conversation, technology is amazing and horrible at the same time. One of the things that I've noticed through this pandemic is people have fewer boundaries surrounding personal time when it comes to Zoom sessions. So can you, this meeting in 15 minutes, can you meet with a student? Can you meet with, and so that, just with the technology in general. But through this pandemic, I noticed for me, whether it be looking at something on my phone or watching the news or whatever, I was scared, consistently scared. It seemed like there was no way we were coming out of this. We were all going to be so flawed at the end of this. And so that media exposure, when I started to understand that I was not well and I was experiencing some form of trauma, I took a break. I took a break from social media. I took a break from the news. I still looked up certain things just to be informed. Like once a week, I would go in and say, making sure that I knew what was going on, current events. But our media is so divisive. And it is so very much like you're here or you're here. And we put people into blocks. And if you watch this kind of news, then you're A. And if you watch this kind of news, then you're B. Well, that further divides us, providing more opportunities for trauma. And, we're seeing this with like levels of violence and stuff in our communities. And I really do think for me, having a diet from social media or media in general is it's very much a practice of self-care.
Makes sense.
Yeah. One of many. I mean, I have, it's daily. It's different for me. What do I do today to stay well? What do I, but I wake up every morning and my first thought is, what do I get to do today? I make myself say that every morning when I'm like, first off, you woke up. Hey, now what do you get to do today? Because oftentimes I would say, what do I have to do today? And everything seemed like a chore. And so I do the things that are required of me, but then I look at them as a privilege. I get to take my daughter to school. I get to go teach at the university. I get to do these things that, I have chosen to fulfill me. But I also get to do things like I get to work out. I have this amazing able-bodied privilege. And so talking to myself about my gifts and my privilege and the things that bring me joy shifted my brain power, where my energy went in my brain.
And that's why I think wellness a lot is perspective. Like you said, thought we were talking about when I first started saying self-care, automatically $150 an hour massages. And yeah. And so I had a really hard time with letting myself do anything to take care of myself because of that conception. And then gradually over time, more and more and more, realizing it is your perspective. It is your perception. It is the 3 minutes when you've mentioned a couple times, noticing when you get in the car in the morning, when we come to Hardin Park and there's mornings that the sunrise is just breathtaking. And so it actually isn't, those are great. And if you can do them, again, privilege, that's fantastic. But it is the 3 minutes of smelling certain smells or noticing certain sights or changing how you speak of something that actually, to me, is the more critical, consistent part of being well.
I agree. And with the paying attention to my body, sometimes, I can feel this. And I'm like, pull your shoulders away from your ears and let's move on.
Last week when I was really struggling, the people around me that loved me the most were like, don't forget to breathe. And I'd be like, I just want to tell the whole audience, this is going to be recorded. You can be aggressive when you're breathing. Like I was doing the breathing, there was air coming into my body, but it was not relaxing in the slightest. And I actually couldn't feel like I was getting any oxygen still. So it was like incredibly illuminating to me that I can be doing the process of breathing and not actually be getting what I need. And so that is a state of mind thing. That really was fascinating to me.
I agree. Well, and perceptive, just you're being perceptive of what you're experiencing.
And noticing. Like when you talk about tight chest, I'm like, you can be doing your breathing and your chest is still tight. So obviously something's not working here the way it was supposed to.
That's right. The body keeps the score.
Exactly. Another thing that when we talked the last time that I had to be sure and say that I love so much that came out of your mouth is, if you don't heal from your cut, you'll bleed on someone else.
Somebody that did not cut you.
Yeah. So that was a really good visual for me about, we call it in the schools, critical necessity of wellness. That's an ethical obligation, kind of what you were saying, you're not your best form of yourself unless you are doing those things that take care of yourself.
Yeah. And I have to be honest when I say that I bled on a lot of people that did not cut me. And I know that I was triggered by certain individuals. I don't even know why. There was a lot of transference and countertransference. And it wasn't until I started doing the work that I was like, this has nothing to do with this person. Because I would think I didn't like somebody. I'm like, that's not who you want to be. And it was because whatever the person in front of me was triggering something within me didn't have anything to do with them.
Right.
But I mean, I have no space for things like racism and misogyny and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people that weren't, that didn't cut me and were just, benign pieces.
You of someone else. I have those things too. And now I know if I feel a certain way, if I have a reaction to someone, then as soon as I can get away from it and start, like, they have reminded me of someone, probably from when I was very small, that had nothing to do with what was happening.
And it may not even be somebody you remember.
Right.
The brain is very powerful at repressing memories.
I'm making sure you didn't say anything. There was one more thing. Oh, you had said something we were talking before about trauma and unresolved and unrecognized grief.
Yeah, that's a big part of my practice, is helping people to acknowledge when they haven't processed through grief. And we think grief is bereavement. And the difference being is bereavement is what happens after somebody dies. And so we don't allow people to grieve a loss that's not something that societally views as a norm. So when we say things like, he or she is in a better place, they lived a good life, it was just a dog, at least you could get pregnant, at least. So these statements are about us, like making us feel better with somebody that's in pain. And I think of grief as any form of pain. And so if this pain stays and we don't have the opportunity to process through the pain, then it's going to impact our mental wellness and sometimes, develop into some sort of mental illness. And so allowing somebody space to really, truly grieve. And there are those stages of grief, but we have to understand that they're not cyclical. It's not like you're here, you're done. It's like you could be angry and bargain for 10 years. So saying that one person's grief is bigger than is saying that one person's trauma is bigger than. I think it's very much individualized. An acknowledgement of somebody's pain is good. Allowing space and time for somebody to grieve through that pain is better.
I saw, I was doing the trauma certification through FSU last week, and they had a TED talk by a guy, Max Strom, who does breathing. He's like a consultant in breathing. And towards the end, he said, when someone is sad, do not try to cheer them up.
That's right.
What you say is, this is going to hurt really bad for a while. And I'm right here, and we'll do it together. Oh my gosh, it was so good. And so I immediately sent out that video and that quote to as many people as I could think of, because I think that is another like grave mistake we make in our culture of trying to cheer people up.
That's right.
You'll get over this in time. This is whatever, all the things we say to each other. When actually, just like, this is rough and I'm right here. And that's all that you need to say.
And I see your pain is real. I may never have experienced anything on this level, or I don't like when people say to me, I know what you're feeling. Well, you're not me. And I don't like to say that to people, but also even things like you can grieve the loss of a childhood you desired because it wasn't what you wanted. You can grieve when you lose a relationship, even if it's a terrible relationship. It's okay to grieve that loss. It's okay to grieve the loss of what you wanted it to be. It's okay to grieve whatever has hurt you. And we don't normalize that. We're like, well, that was 10 years ago, or you should be over that by now. I remember a friend of mine was in a relationship for a significant amount of time. When the relationship ended, somebody said to her, you give 1 month for every year that y'all were together and you'll be fine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so without ever doing any work, this individual thought, oh, well, in September, I'm going to just be good to go. And I thought that is really insulting to the process, to not even just to say, yuck, this sucks. And it's sometimes that's all you need to say. Yeah. And Brene Brown does a lot of work on that, like that empathetic response to somebody who's grieving, and no empathetic response ever starts with at least. And that really resonated with me.
Yeah. We talked last week about a video of hers where she talks about being down in a hole. Haley Bain gave this to me, and so I won't steal the credit. And so some animals go down in the hole to sit with the person, and some animals holler from the top, like, how I'm going on to the store, whatever it is you say.
It's a bear and a giraffe. And she's like, you want a sandwich?
Yeah.
Like, no.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's it. And it really does summarize how we don't want to experience our own pain. And we definitely don't want to experience somebody else's with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it hurts a whole lot.
Well, especially if your stuff is unresolved.
Yeah. So we got just a couple more minutes. I'm gonna start winding us up. Kate, is there anything that you want to say? I tried to take all my notes and bring you back to the things that were most important to me, at least. Anything that you think of we haven't talked about? Is there a magic answer for self-care, especially when you're caring for others? You've given us so many good information about boundaries and awareness and ethical obligations and friendships. Anything else you think you want to add before we finish?
I just think it's really important to find out what you like to do. I mean, I remember for years I thought exercise was punitive and you only did exercise to get healthy or to get skinny. And now I realize like there are certain ways that I can move my body that I truly enjoy. I really love doing this. I love to do art. I love to spend time with my kid. I make time for these things because they make me happy. And if I'm happy, then the people around me are going to be happy. Well, not like this, like I used to, but if I'm happy, then I can help people to get to that place as well. I can empower them to make the changes.
You're not also not making them miserable. I think about when my kids were little and I didn't understand yet, I have to take care of me or I can't take care of them. And I remember trying to push through that needing something for me and how irritable and grumpy and short-tempered and all of the explosive, all of those things I was because I wasn't getting what I needed. And I didn't even know at the time that that's what was happening. It wasn't until they were, older that I finally realized that. But I think you said you watched last week and where I had gotten my workbook of 100 things that cheer me up. And I opened it to that page and went, 100? I can't think of 3. And my 17-year-old was like, oh my God, Mom, that's a disgrace. And so now I'm so noticing all through the day, I'm like, oh, that makes me happy. Like that wasn't even in my awareness. And going back and writing it, sometimes I have to put it on my phone or post-it note until I get it to my workbook. I think I'm up to like maybe 22 things now when I thought I couldn't go past 3. So my goal is to have 100 eventually. But right now I'm just at 22.
I love that. And I think maybe the next list could be 100 things you like about yourself.
Oh, dear heavens. Again, let's start with 3 and let's see if I can go to 100. There's Hunter. She knows about it. Hunter's Facebook posts make me happy.
Very much so. Yeah, me too.
Y'all make me happy.
Oh, well, thanks, Hunter. It's good to see you. All right, we're going to wrap up so people have time to go to the bathroom and get something to drink and pet an animal or kiss a baby before we go to our next things, probably at 1. It was good to see everybody. Next week, we're going to be doing something, an excerpt from a book about meth addiction in the mountains and how it impacts families and children in foster care from people who have lived that experience. I'm excited about it. If you have anything you want to say to Kate, if you'll type it into the chat, I will copy and paste and send it to her to read when she has time. Good to be with everybody today. I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope the rest of your day and the rest of your week goes well, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good day. Thanks, Kate.